Let me tell you about the most dangerous time for whites in the history of Ivory Coast and how we arrived just in time for that very moment. Isaiah 91:15. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. It started when we were deciding whether we should go back to Ivory Coast. There were two issues. One was my health. The other was the stability of the country. The first one, my health, was a real stickler. We didn't know why I was dragging. And when I went through hardship, it got worse. But when we came back on furlough, I ended up regaining strength enough so that we decided, well, maybe we can go back. It would be okay. Looking back, I didn't realize just how bad off I really was. I had such a never say die attitude, and I was used to getting things out more than I should. But we were going to take things in stages so I would not get too tired, and we were sure everything would be okay. For the second one, the country, things were unstable, but they had been that way for a long time, and we had lived to a degree in an unsafe environment. We just had learned how to be streetwise and stay low. With missionaries, we take risks. That's part of the hazards of the trade. But when is it too much to risk? When should you really stop and not go? We weren't going to be stupid. We sought the Lord, we prayed, we contacted people in the country, and they said it was okay to come. They said it could be like that for another 10 years, and so why stay home? Finally, we had a peace about it and felt that the Lord was telling us to go on. Looking back, we still felt the Lord telling us that it was His will. But sometimes when God gives you a peace about doing something, it could mean He's leading you into a huge trial for His own purposes. So we took off for a 2-day trip via airplane with a stop in Paris. We arrived in the country and rested in Abidjan so I could regain my strength at the guest house. We then left for San Pedro along a very bumpy road. San Pedro is a port town on the ocean, about an hour from the village. We were going to stay a couple nights at the mission guest house there so I could rest before heading inland to the village. The Brennemans, a missionary couple with their teenage daughter, were manning the guest house at that time. And there was no one else. The next day we relaxed and went to the beach. Since I wasn't doing so well, we decided to stay another night. That night was going to be an event that would change everything. This was a situation that Ivory Coast was in. There was a civil war that was going on between the North and the South. It had settled down to an uneasy truce with a peacekeeping force of French and UN soldiers kind of right in the middle in the town of Bouaké. That was a dividing line between the North and the South. But the South broke the peace treaty and bombed Bouaké. They also bombed the French barracks, they said by mistake. The French didn't think so, because within 20 minutes, they sent their military planes to the capital and took out the entire Ivorian Air Force of 2 grounded planes. And the Ivorian Southerners were mad. The French became the target now for their anger instead of at the Northerners. You have to know African history to know why the target group is in the hot spot. This is how genocide happens. The mob can be truly ruthless and cruel to the target group. We saw what happened when Ghana won a football match, and there were riots in the stands. The Ivorians took to harassing and being very cruel to the Ghanaians and blocked their exit out. So with the anger turned towards the French, we were now by default the target group because we looked very French. So let me give you some wider context. It is like there's a heartbeat in the country. The pulse starts in one part, and it goes throughout the whole body, affecting every area. That pulse went from city to city with armed mobs attacking French businesses and homes. That pulse traveled fast to reach San Pedro, too. Then an African friend of the Brennemans, an inside source, said an armed mob was coming that night to target the French in San Pedro. He outlined the route, and we were on it. Things started to happen. That day, we also heard on the radio what had happened in Abidjan, where the pulse started. All 4 French schools had been burned. Whites were dragged out of their cars and beaten. We heard that some were killed. The mobs tried to take the airport, but were repelled by the French. The embassy told us all to stay inside. Before when we went through unrest and we were not the target group, we just hunkered down and it would pass. But knowing we were a target was different because we were now the hunted ones. Knowing that the mob was coming, we prepared for possible escape. Since we were on the fringe of the rainforest that bordered the ocean, Chaba and Greg, the other missionary husband, came up with a plan. They came back and told us of it. We were to prepare a flight bag with bare essentials in it, change into dark clothes with pants and shoes. You know why this is not normal? It's because women don't normally wear pants, and all of us usually don't normally wear shoes unless we're going to church. So they had to find me and Noah a pair of pants, and then we had to get shoes on. But this is because we were thinking we might have to go in the forest, and wearing skirts at that point and sandals is not a good idea. So the two husbands would stay by the front and arm themselves in case they had to fight. The rest would sleep, and the rest of us would sleep back in apartment number 5 near the rear exit. If the mobs were to come, the men would radio back for us to get out quickly, and then we would slip quietly into the forest. They would then meet us in the forest and would either hunker down in the darkness until the mob passed, or we would bushwhack through it to find an exit out if we were pursued. The weapons were only in case of emergency for the men to use to buy us time to get out and away. And then Chaba moved his car back to number 5, so it wouldn't be harmed. It sounded like a good plan, so we prepared a small bag that could be used in flight. In the bag, we put flashlights, water, granola, plastic to sit on, insect repellent, malaria treatment, medicines, a small Bible, money, passports, and a machete for the forest, and that was it. If we fled, we would assume that we would say goodbye to everything else. On top of that, I was really out of it. And the way I felt, just picture how it is to have a really major case of the flu when you're just really out of it. Take away all the symptoms like sore throat and fever, add extra weakness, and that was how I felt. And I would feel like that, to various degrees for the next 6 years. So that's kind of the context of the condition that I'm in when I'm going to go through the next bit that I'm going to talk about. I felt like I was barely hanging in there, but adrenaline does wonders, and we were in a dangerous spot. I had to do this. A mob's not going to distinguish between a sick and a healthy person for their anger. One can always find a little more energy. It seemed like we were living off adrenaline that whole week. Now, in the photo that is going to come, that's apartment number 5, and that's the car. But for these next photos, they're taken the day, but just picture what it would be like if it was at night. So now it's the night of the real thing. We had our bag packed, our shoes on, and we were back in apartment number 5. And, So far, so good. We knew that what we were to do, slip out the back quietly at the call from the radio. Does it sound simple? Reality proved less so. Honestly, we really should have done some drills or something, because it didn't quite turn out the way we wanted it to. Here was how our time went late that night. I was trying to rest on the bed with my pants and shoes on. The kids were too excited to sleep, so they played rook by lantern light. Teresa, the other missionary girl, teen girl, she had her dog, an African gray parrot, with her on the bed as well, making things even more cozy. In the distance, we could hear the volleys of gunshot being fired in town, and I was so tired. I was wondering how the other missionaries were faring back in town. Were they okay? I thought of my husband up at the gate and thought, wow, what a man. He's willing to put himself between us and a mob of armed and drunk men, being armed only with a machete. And speaking of the front gate, let's go there and see what was happening. Now, this front gate looks impenetrable, but really it's not. To the side of that, over to the one side, it's low down. You can hop over it fairly easily, so it wasn't all that secure. In order to give you the proper context of what's going to happen next, let me first explain about Greg Brenneman. I don't know how he ended up on the mission field. He said it was because of a dare, but he was a Harley man through and through, and Chaba called him a Michigan redneck. He was real tough-looking when he wanted to be, and he had a long pigtail down his back. He definitely wasn't of your average missionary stock, but we liked him just the way he was. Well, to go along with Greg's Harley bent, his idea of the night watchman thing was to go beyond a mere machete and upgrade to a double-headed axe. He looked the part of Gimli and had the spirit of him, too. By golly, he wasn't going to let an armed mob onto the premises, no way, so he stationed himself outside the gate. But this was not according to plan. Plans were to stay on the inside of the gate and to sound the warning for us to get out and avoid a confrontation. I mean, what is an axe to a gun? And wielded by drunk men, too. There wouldn't have been a problem if things went according to plan. But now that Greg was on the outside of the gate and ready to take on the whole mob, there certainly would be a problem. The night guardsman was worried, the African night guardsman, and Chaba was worried too. They pleaded with Greg to come on the inside of the gate. He would not. More pleading and reasoning, but he was not going to wimp out. He was going to hold his ground. And about half an hour of reasoning sense into Greg, Chaba finally talked him into coming on the inside of the gate and keeping with the original plans. So they sat there with their weapons and waited, and all the while hearing gunfire coming from town. To kill time, Chaba told him of this guy he knew back home named Larry Cernick. And he said something about this guy wanting to get a posse together to get the trapped missionary kids out of the boarding school held by rebels a little while ago. Chaba just told Greg, you gotta meet this guy, you get along great. Anyhow, back at apartment number 5. It was a very small apartment, it was 1 bedroom. And this is now the scene. The kids were finally asleep. Noi, Teresa, the golden lab pup, and the parrot were sharing 1 bed, probably a twin bed. The boys lounged around in the various rooms here and there on the floor. I was in the side room and finally got some sleep around midnight when we were woken up by 3 gunshots fairly close up. It sounded like a firecracker, pop, pop, pop. It is hard to tell with guns how close they are, but they were definitely closer than the faraway ones we'd heard coming from town. And there was a wilderness between us and town, so we knew something was on our side of the wilderness. Then came the radio call, get out now. This was it. This is the moment we prepared for. This was our moment of glory. So we got everyone up except for Jeremiah, who wouldn't wake up. Well, I was trying to rouse my heavy sleeper. The rest of the kids got in line for the 1 bathroom. Come on, Jeremiah. We're going into the forest. Come on, get up, get up. But he didn't, and I had to shake him until finally he woke up a bit groggy and confused. It took me another couple of minutes to explain what we were doing. We're going into the forest. I don't remember what ended up happening, but finally we got everyone going in the same direction at the same time, with dog and parrot in tow. We made our way silently to the back door. Now just picture it's dark here, and that's the door. And there was a solid wall of forest in the front of us. We opened the latch, went through the door, and Julie handed me the machete as we looked at this big black wall of forest and said, lead on. I took the machete, gulped, and headed for a dark hole in the side of that solid wall. It was a path of sorts. We got the kids following in line. Everyone follows behind the person with the flashlight because cobras come out at night and you want to see where you're stepping. We headed into the forest, and it was even darker in there. The dog didn't like it and started to whimper. He was a lab pup the whole time, and the parrot got nervous and started to do his what's up whistle the whole time, too. In the meantime, the kids were whispering for the dog to shut up. So much for our stealth mission. We went a little ways down the dark, windy path, and I was reluctant to go on without the men. We found a small cleared area under a canopy of dense overgrowth, and I spread the plastic and we sat down. I turned off the flashlight and we waited. It was very dark. It also stank because it was a bathroom area of the nearest African farm hut. We sat in silence, except for the dog, who kept on whimpering, and the parrot, who kept on whistling. Never bring animals on a stealth mission. We kept hearing gunshot and cannon in the background. It sounded like a battle was going on in the city. We were wondering what was going on, and were the other missionaries okay? We also wondered how the men were faring. We didn't hear any more pistol shots close by. Again, silence, whimper, whistle, darkness, smell. About half an hour later, we saw a flashlight come bobbing down the path. It was Chaba. He said the mob was farther away than he thought, and it was safe to come back. We went back, and most of the kids went to bed. Noi, Chaba, and I stood outside under the stars and talked. Chaba had just gotten a phone call from the missionaries in town. The mob had been by the Messer's place. They're a large family with a lot of little kids. And the mob went by there and demanded to know if they were French. The night guardsmen came to the rescue and said that they were American, and the mob smashed the water meter in anger and then left. They were safe. The other families had their stories too, but they were not harmed either. They asked us how we were doing, and Chaba told them. We were all praying for each other. We didn't know what would happen that night. Would they come? What would they do? Could we really get our act together and escape successfully? So many weighty questions with the one goal of sparing our hides. Was this the only one night's rage, and could we stay, or should we get out of the country? We've gone through unrest before, but nothing this bad. If we didn't get out, would we be trapped in a country that would then explode? There was so much to think about. In contrast to all this, as we're looking outside at the stars and hearing the gunshot, Noi mentioned that about right now, at 2 a.m., her friends back in Moscow were getting ready for a ball. She wondered what they were doing now and imagined all the gaiety and getting ready for the ball and their finery and expectation of a fun-filled evening. She sighed and said, with gunfire going off in the background, I wonder if they're thinking of me right now, as I am thinking of them. And I said, well, they're probably too busy getting ready. I asked Chaba what was going on with the cannon, and he said that there must be a battle going on in the city, but at least it was farther away. I looked at the stars, and they were so peaceful and calm. God was calm. This was nothing to him. Why should it be anything to us? He had everything under control, and he would lead us. All we had to do was obey him. He'd see to the rest. In fact, everything was always under control, even in our most dangerous situations. After that, the men went back to their posts and would not sleep that night. They would stay up all night with their machetes by that gate, waiting to see if the gang would come back. We in the back finally got some sleep, and boy, were we going to need it. The next morning, I thought he was crazy, but Greg is Greg. We wouldn't have done this, but he went into town. He wanted to see what was going on. He came back with his report. French businesses were ransacked, and looting was still going on. Places had been burned and gutted. They were even stealing the roofing. The luxury hotel on the beach was vandalized and looted. They were even stealing the roofing. The mob hit the Assemblies of God mission because there was a French woman now running it. When the mob arrived, she slipped out into the forest, and she had to wait in the forest as she heard her place being vandalized and looted. The mob made its way to a hotel just 300 meters from us. Our group of houses was next, but the pickings were so good there, and they were too drunk, and that spared us. They were spent for the night. But our informant told us that they had planned to finish the job the next night, and that meant we would be on the docket. The people from the French houses around us, you can see them in the background, they were scared, and they went to the gendarmes in town, the police, to try to get some type of protection. That was sort of arranged, but we heard that there might be a gun battle on our street. Noi's immediate reaction was to run to the window because she wanted to watch it. Hava says, get away from that window. I don't want anyone to know we had teenage girls here. Stay low. Oh, Dad. That day was one of preparations. Doing clothes, and Chaba printed out a bunch of American flags. We had to make sure that everyone knew we were American and we were not French. It was not cool to be French right then. And then we put our car, we put them on our car, and then we had to make sure that we had enough. We've done this before in times of unrest. Get a bag of rice, fill up all the water bottles, make sure we had water in case the water was turned off, had enough food in case we couldn't get to the store. And we didn't know if we were going to have to hunker down and wait it out or try to escape. In the meantime, I wrote Hans. He was supposed to come in a week to visit us. This letter is a bit disjointed, but here's a clip. This is to Hans. Please pray for us that all will calm down and that we won't be hit by the mob tonight. Pray that we won't have to flee into the bush again and that we will continue to have water, food, electricity. Pray that no one gets sick with malaria, as we got bitten in the forest, and I don't know if we could get to a doctor now. Pray that we'll be able to decipher God's will correctly. As far as your plans for coming here, everything is on hold now. P.S. We just heard that an American woman was killed up in Bouake. I wonder if it is one of the missionaries. I wish I knew who it was. The boarding school with some teachers and their own kids are in Bouake still. The rest of the kids were evacuated earlier. The Groots have their kids in the school, boarding school in Yamoussoukro. Pray for them too. Oh, the woman who was killed was a missionary at the boarding school. I don't know details. Another P.S. Thankfully, some things never change. I hear whistle playing coming from the bedroom. That was Noe and Andreas with their Irish whistles. The next night went fairly calmly, since there was one gendarme on duty on our street. The only incident was when we woke up in the middle of the night to loud noises below. You would not believe how fast Chaba can shoot up out of bed from a sleeping position to a standing one. And this coming from a man who I could not rouse when I was in labor with our second child. Anyhow, I digress. After he heard the noise, he ran to the window to see if we need to slip out the back again, like before. It ended up being nothing but a loud argument, and we finished the night fitfully. It's hard to sleep when the slightest noises make you jump. The next day, we were wondering what to do. Would this blow over, and could we steal away to the village and wait it out? It's actually safer in the village. Or would the whole country erupt and we'd be caught? There's usually a window of time that you're able to get out before the country locks down. And then who's ever left in the country has to pretty much weather whatever comes, because then escape would be very, very difficult. Usually what happens when there's unrest is all sources of communication are usually shut down, and that's TV, radio, possibly phone. And usually the exits are blocked. It makes it difficult. We prayed as we didn't want to abandon our African colleagues back in the village. They were like family. Chab was still determined to get to the village, hoping this would all blow over, and waited out there. I was feeling uneasy, since my energy was getting dangerously low. Then an answer came in a 3-week confirmation. We heard back from Robert, who was the acting head for our branch in Mali. It was his job to oversee us in a crisis. Even though he had told us to wait it out, missionaries don't quit the area easily. He was feeling more and more uneasy about this, and he wanted us all out. We then heard from the elders of Christchurch. They were also in daily contact with us, and after much prayer and concern, they told us to get out. We were relieved that the decision was made from above, and now all we had to do is follow orders. To confirm all this, the other missionaries there in San Pedro, the Watkin clan with the Baptists, these missionaries, they're friends of ours, and a lot of them were missionary kids that came back. They grew up on the mission field. They're really tough people. They've gone through a lot, will weather incredible things. They decided to leave. We thought, oh, if they're deciding to leave, it's serious. Because an informant high up in the government told them that they had better leave now. Things were brewing high up. We knew from experience what Africa was capable of, and it was a scary thought. It might descend upon us. It looked like the eye of the storm. So now we had to get out while there was still a chance for it. And one of the warning signs of imminent danger for us was that there was hate speeches on the radio about that time that mentioned to kill all foreigners. Not a happy thought. Finally, Alexei, our translator, called and told Chaba, says, "Get out. We have no peace back here while you stay in this country." He said, and then he said, "I'm going to come down and I'm going to escort you out." So it was settled. Chaba finally felt just really good about it. The next question was how? How do you get out? By road would be risky, as we could be barricaded in and then mobs attack us on the road. We didn't know how hostile people were going to be in the towns that we would go through, because remember that deadly pulse is running through the country and people are agitated. There was a French evacuation plane that was supposed to be coming, and we could try to get on that. There was some talk of bringing in an Army helicopter. The kids wanted very badly to go on an Army helicopter, but that was not to be. We had to sign up for the evacuation plane by 11 o'clock in the morning if we were to take it. Robert Hale just says, "Get out any way you can." We prayed and waited and felt at peace about taking the land route, the more risky of the two. We found out the Brennemans also decided for the land route. The Watkin clan decided to take the plane since it was too risky by land. The other families in their group had little kids, and they didn't want to risk it. For us, there was a very strong urgency to get out and to go by land. this nervousness that we couldn't rest until we did it. So we decided to leave the next morning at the crack of dawn, 5 a.m., to try to slip out of the town without being noticed. Also, another family that evening, the Groots, came in from their village. They were friends of ours and lived way back in the rainforest by the ocean. They came in. Boy, they looked frazzled. They had had a scary time trying to get through town with the mobs. But then the kids played their Irish music, and that seemed to calm them and minister to them. They visibly relaxed. In fact, it ministered to all of us. And all through this really scary time, our kids would be playing music. And it just helped diffuse and relax missionaries wherever we went. But now I'm getting really low. I told Chaba I didn't think I had the energy to do this. And when I said that, it didn't mean, oh, I'm tired. It meant I didn't think I could actually do it. My energy was so low. But Chaba reassured me that God would help. I was in bed most of the time by now, and Noah cooked dinner for us. In fact, this was just a start. Once we did make it to Mali, Noah at 17 would take over my job completely and run the kitchen. But I digress. So, more information came in that caused a bit of urgency. It was Friday, and the UN was to announce sanctions on Monday against Ivory Coast that could start up the rage against foreigners again. So, possibly more hunting on the horizon for whites. We had our American flags printed and on our car. We packed our stuff and headed out at 5 a.m. The town was dark as we drove through it, our 2 cars. We drove cautiously so as not to arouse suspicion. We wanted just to slip out silently, but that was not to be. We saw up ahead a gang of youths. We were uneasy about what they would do, but we kept going. The gang came at our car and surrounded the back of it, slapped the rear of the car, yelled, and went on. They were probably drunk. The way ahead now was clear. We breathed a sigh of relief and drove out of town to the first roadblock at the intersection. And at the intersection, the one road would lead to our village. The other road would go back to Abidjan along the coast. We were told, once we got there, that the barrier would not open until 6 a.m. when the sun came up. Other cars were coming in line too. Evidently, there was a lot of people that wanted to get out. There was tension in the air. Would they even allow us to leave? Ivory Coast was notorious for not letting people leave when they wanted out during times of trouble. This land route was supposed to be dangerous due to that deadly pulse that was running through the country's veins. So Alexei got out and started talking with the guards. Chaba got out and started talking Bakwe with the guards. He even found a Bakwe guard. The man seemed pleased that Chaba was speaking to him in his own language. It worked. The guards let us through. As we drove up to the intersection to turn, I looked down that road that led to our village, and I felt a wrenching feeling in my heart, like my heart was being ripped out. And then we turned on the coastal road, back where we came from. We had never reached the village, and I didn't know when we would ever see it again, and we still haven't. This was only the beginning of long-term grief and saying goodbye to things and people which we loved. This is one of the hardest things of this whole ordeal. But back to the task at hand. We knew there might be more roadblocks ahead and more gangs, and we hoped Alexei could appease them too, but this was not going to be needed. The coastal road was fairly quiet. We made it to Abidjan in the afternoon safely. Once we got there, we felt we could relax now since we had made our destination, so we went out for pizza at a little French pizzeria. In the meantime, the Watkins called Chaba back at San Pedro and asked if we had made it safely. Chaba said we had. Sam said, good, because the plane didn't work out. The cocoa growers and the Lebanese chartered the plane because they were scared, and that left no more room for anyone else. And we knew that the situation was really serious because the Lebanese and the cocoa growers will not leave their money-making business for anything. And so anyhow, Sam says, good, I'm glad, and we're coming too by road. And so they left. There was another missionary family called the Kings. They had a French girl with them, helping them, and they thought it was still too dangerous because she was French. So they said, well, there's one more evacuation plane. We're going to wait for that and take that out because they were too scared to take her via road, just in case. During the next day, we had Ambroise, one of our African employees, buy us tickets to Mali so we could fly there. We had another base in Mali, and that was our ultimate destination. And then we were going to resume translation by bringing our translator up there. But he could only get them for Wednesday. It was Saturday, and Wednesday was a long way off. There was always that tension that if things were to explode again, They would shut down all routes out of the country and we'd be trapped. Food, water, electricity would be scarce, along with medical help. And then we'd have to ride out any attack on the city by hunkering down. My health wasn't doing too well, and this made us nervous. We prayed, asking God what to do. We had only a window of time to make a decision. There were other things to consider. If we took the Wednesday flight, we could take all our stuff, which meant all the school books I needed to homeschool the kids for the next 2 years, our Christmas presents, clothes, everything we needed for our 2 years in Africa. If we left by evacuation flight, we could only take one small carry-on and say goodbye to the rest. Most worrisome were the threats of genocide to the whites, and could they end up being real? We kept praying what to do. Then that night, we heard angry mobs yelling below the apartments as they walked by. We found out that Gbagbo, he's the old president, he had deposed his main military man, which meant that there would be internal fighting. And also, there was a rumor that the North was going to march in the South and attack it, and we were in the target city. And there was no more forest to run into. We couldn't drive out because the government had cut all power to the north and west, and the borders would be shut down. And Josias, another African that worked there, and Alexei said, now we're in for it, you've got to get out now. We'll have no peace until you're out of this country completely. And we also got word from the embassy that things were brewing and could blow, and to try to get out earlier. Then we got word again from Robert Hale, and he thought the same. We heard over the radio that 7,000 French had already left. Everyone was scared. The kids by this time had had overload of the constant high-tension danger thing, and they decided to play rook. When Chaba heard something new and scary over the radio that happened, he said, hey, guess what? Oh, Daddy, I want to play rook, don't want to hear about it. Anyhow, we decided to leave the next day on the evacuation plane. It would be the last Italian plane out. We then had the kids pack their one small bag. What they put in it was very telling, because they were likely to lose everything else. The kids put in their whistles, Andreas's pipes, Noe her art stuff, getting Bibles because they were small, one change of clothes. Chaba took his computer. There was not room for much else. And the one hard thing was Noe couldn't take her violin. It was too big, and that was really hard. But later on, after we made it to Mali, Greg Brenneman was going to end up making a mad dash back down to the country to get his dog and his parrot and Noe's violin, so we did get that. The Brennemans came over, and there was a lot of joking and music. And we were waiting to leave that morning. I was too tired to do anything more than pack my one bag. Noe cooked us a meal of white beans and a sauce of hot dogs, carrots and peas and a sauce of white beans. I asked if she was going to make a dessert with beans too, and she just smiled. We didn't have much to eat since the stores were not open. We decided to head for the airport 5 hours in advance to reserve a spot on the airplane. We found out that it was first come, first serve. Amboise, a center employee, drove us to the airport, but he took the back roads because he got inside information that there were mobs on the main route. As we drove to the airport, I was shocked. It was like we were driving in a war zone. French businesses were burned. Broken glass littered the streets. There were skeletons of burned taxis here and there. As we got closer to the airport, there were military tanks with French soldiers in them, barbed wire, army trucks. The glass of the airport had bullet holes and cracks in it. The airport was empty outside of official people. We registered with the Italian officers and sat down on the empty conveyor belt to await the plane. The Sam Watkins family arrived with the other 2 missionaries. The Kings were still on the road trying to make the flight. Their plane had never arrived, and they scrambled to take the land route out. And to make that plane, which is one of the last evacuation planes out, we prayed for them. By now I was so tired and weak that I laid down on the conveyor belt. And if you look at that picture over to the, I'm laying down right there. The missionary kids were watching a movie on the floor. Andreas and Noe got out their whistles and started playing their Celtic music again. The airport reverberated with it and turned a war zone into a party. Then the other conveyor belt started up. But then I got up, and I had always wanted to ride on one, so Julie and I got on it and took a ride. Haven't you always wanted to do that? We waved at an official as we went by. No one seemed to care. Then we got off before it went behind the wall. Some of the missionary kids got on the belts too and were having a blast. Some actually did go behind the wall. Saw them disappear and come back out. Finally, other internationals arrived wanting to flee, but not all of us would fit on the plane. But since we were the first ones there, we would get on. The king still hadn't arrived. We prayed. Eventually they did arrive, and we thanked God, but then we had to pray that they would actually get a place in the plane. God granted it. Stephen King walked over to Chaba and said, "You were the smart ones to get out by road. We were let down by a plane that would never come." Then we found out that the embassy had just bumped the danger status up to the highest danger. They have different ways of ranking, and different people leave at different times. Missionaries are usually the last ones out. Now they're saying everyone's just gotta leave this country. When it was time to walk outside, we noticed all the commercial planes were gone. We found out that in times of danger, they fly them out of the country for safety. We would see them again when we landed in Ghana. We had to walk across the airport pavement to a huge military cargo plane. It looked like a whale. Then the rear belly of the whale opened and we got in. Once in, any hopes of bathrooms or peanuts and a drink were dashed. We were all seated in a row sideways and put on harnesses that were way too big for us. The inside of the whale looked like a boiler room with ladders and hooks and equipment. There were only 2 small holes up high for the windows. The hatch was then closed. It was dark inside. Steam was let out, and we could barely see people. We then took off into a lightning storm and flew to Ghana. The kids were excited. They played cards in the plane. This is just a grand adventure to them. When we got there, the embassy was a bit unorganized, and we had to wait around in long lines as they decided what to do. It's very late at night. It's probably around midnight. Wycliffe had a center in Ghana, so we took a taxi to it. They were waiting for us. Robert had arranged that. It was almost midnight, and I was so tired. But at least we could relax now. We were out of danger. We just had the task of how do we get to our next destination, Mali. We found out that there were no direct flights from Ghana to Mali. And through all this, I was very impressed with how the kids handled this whole dangerous time. They were helpful. They had good attitudes. They didn't crumble in fear. In fact, some showed absolutely no fear at all. They were up for the adventure. When called upon to help, they were willing to step in the gap, even if it meant quite a bit of sacrifice to their own time. Now, the next decision had to be made. How do we get to Mali? There were no direct flights out. So we had to go to Togo next door and take a flight out from there. The next flight to Togo was in a week's time, and that seemed too long. The other option was to take a 3-hour trip over land and catch a flight out the next day in Togo. I was way too weak to go the next day, so we waited a day. That gave me time just to rest. Chaba and Greg chartered a couple taxis to the border. The taxis were not allowed to go beyond that. We had to find our way from there. We also needed a visa, and the Togo embassy was closed that day for a holiday. We decided to try risking it by going to the border and trying to get a visa there. So we took the 3-hour trip by taxi and were dumped off at the border. We had to walk in intense heat, not too long of a walk, to the border crossing. Since there were so many refugees pouring in from Ivory Coast, this wasn't as much of a problem as it could have been, but it took a long time. Time standing in intense heat and waiting. Chaba and Greg were inside talking with the officials, and I was so weak by now that Chaba pulled me in and got me a place to sit too. I could barely stand. Robert, in the meantime, had gotten us tickets to fly to Togo airport that afternoon. We would just make it in time. In the meantime, since we had left Ivory Coast, all that Hans knew is that we had to get out, we were in imminent danger, and then he had no contact with us for a couple days, and so that was really hard on him. So we had Robert contact Hans, since we couldn't, and tell him that we were okay. So we got through all the red tape. We had a couple of taxis drive us to the airport. It was now 11 o'clock, and our flight was due out at 2 o'clock. We got to the airport in time. We were met by Jim Green, a Wycliffe missionary that worked at the Togo Wycliffe base. Thankfully, Wycliffe has a network of guest houses all across Africa. He handed us our tickets that Robert had bought, and we thanked him and told him he didn't need to stay with us. He just smiled and said, "I'm going to stay right here until I see that plane with you on it, with my own eyes." We didn't think that necessary, but accepted anyhow, since he wasn't going to budge. He was just a typical stubborn missionary. At 3 o'clock, we were wondering where the plane was. And after inquiring, we were told it had decided not to land in Togo that day because we weren't worth it. There was only a couple people. Why bother? Okay, Jim Green just shook his head and said, "Yep, that happens. Don't worry. I'll put you up at the guest house, arrange meals for you, and book another flight out in 2 days." It proved to be a real blessing to me because then I could recuperate. So I was still really, really tired. Chaba and the family went to the beach, and I rested. On Thursday, We went to the airport 2 hours in advance. Again, Jim stayed with us to make sure he saw the plane and with us on it. We waited and waited. 4 hours later, we were allowed to board. We all breathed a sigh of relief that this one was actually there. What would end up being the new surprise is that the Abidjan airport did open for connecting flights, and we didn't realize that we were going to be flown back to Abidjan for a connecting flight up to Mali. I mean, this was the country we had so much hassle in getting out of. Now we're going back to it. And we were not happy campers. The one thing we were really afraid of is that we were afraid that we would be abandoned in Ivory Coast because the plane system there is very unpredictable. Planes can come when they want to and leave when they want to or not show up at all. And so we were a bit concerned about that. But I was going under pretty badly. I was so weak and so tired that I could barely sit, and even in a chair. I had that desperate feeling like I couldn't keep even in an upright position. I looked for a place to lay down on that crowded, dirty African airport floor. The place was packed. I slumped over a chair and leaned my head on Chaba and tried to maintain what little energy I had left by conserving it. You can kind of do that. I've learned how to do that, where you just kind of block everything out and just kind of focus and just say, steady on, hang in there. Chaba, okay, on the other side, there was glass. On the other side, there was UN troops. Chaba called Josias and said, guess what? Yeah, we're back. You might need to pick us up. We'll keep you posted. But thank God, another plane did come from us. We boarded and flew over Ivory Coast and headed north. We noticed that as we got out of Abidjan, everything was lit. It was lit for a while, and then all of a sudden it was dark. Even though we were flying over towns and cities, it was all dark. So it was true, the power had been cut to the north. We arrived in Mali and found Robert on the other end. He was happy to see us. We went to the center and were met by missionaries who provided us with meals and clothing and other things that we were missing. One of the missionaries told us later that as the refugees came in, that was us, we had looked so exhausted and flattened, lifeless was the word. And she was so glad after a couple months that she began to see some life back in us and perk up, everyone except me. I ended up getting the flu, and any hope of recovering any type of strength for a long, long time was soon gone. What took the normal adult 2 months was going to take me more like 6 years. Here was my situation once we were in Mali. It would take me 6 months before I was even strong enough to walk into a doctor's office to find out what was wrong. It took me 8 months before I could do the smallest house tasks like folding clothes or setting the table. It took a year and a half before I was strong enough to be wheeled onto an airplane in a wheelchair to come home. Then, once I was home, I would be mostly a shut-in for the first 2 years. For the 2 or 3 years after that, I would function at a very low level on the fringe of the community. Until one day, God decided I was done and revealed to me the cause. It was when we did some car camping, when I was finally a little bit stronger. And knowing in the tent, heard someone choking through the night. Found out after a sleep study, I had very severe sleep apnea. Evidently, I wasn't going really into REM sleep, and that's where you get your true rest, I guess for years, not very much. And I was oxygen deprived every night, and that can really mess with you. And it would explain why going through a heavy, heavy, high-stress situation, oxygen deprived and sleep deprived can really do it to you. So once I got on the machine that would help me breathe, it was the equivalent of miraculous recovery, and I came up to full strength a year and a half later. Looking back, even though God spared us from an awful lot, things could have gone a lot easier. We could have gotten the flight out and not have to have been rerouted, all through West Africa. It would have been nice to have had a direct flight from Ghana up to Mali. There are many ways, and then getting the flu at the very opposite end, it just, all these things completely flattened me to where I was down. I was just like, laying down for the first 2 months at least, and it was a very, very difficult ride. But people say when things go really well, far beyond what they expected, they say, oh, God is good. But I say, even after things were made hard in many ways on us, and I knew at whose hand they were coming from, God's, I still say God is good. He is always good, even when we're being hit harder than we think appropriate. He came through and would always come through, and to that I give him the praise and the glory. The evacuation period was hard, but he was preparing me for much harder things to come when I would be down for the next 5 years physically, and that was a very, very rough time. But he was there through it all, and he taught me so much. And I can say with Rutherford, Samuel Rutherford, loveliness of Christ, I dare not say, but my Lord Jesus hath fully recompensed my sadness with his joys, my losses with his own presence. I find it a sweet and rich thing to exchange my sorrows with Christ's joy, my afflictions with that sweet peace I have with him. And then he says again, lay all your loads and your weights by faith upon Christ. Ease yourself. Let him bear all. He can, he does. He will bear you. Thank you.